This training will be using Civil 3D 2018, and I'll be going over inserting LiDAR into Civil 3D. In order to do this, you'll have to be using ArcMap, and there's a couple steps you have to do before opening up ArcMap. So what you need to do is borrow a couple licenses, and that you do by going to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, click the Start Windows button, type in the ArcGIS Administrator, go ahead and click to open it. The ArcGIS Administrator window appears, and then on the left-hand column, click Folder, Borrow, Return.
To the right-hand side of the window, you will check 3D Analyst and Spatial Analyst.
You want to make sure that you have either a Scratch or a Workspace folder created in your C drive. And please keep in mind that when you borrow these licenses, it's only for 30 days. When you're coming up on 30 days, it'll actually come up with a splash window showing a warning when you open up ArcMap. So you click your little windows down at the bottom left-hand corner, and you can go to ArcGIS and ArcGIS Administrator, or in the instructions, like I said, you could type in the search bar in your Windows 10, and it'll take you to the same place. But you just go to ArcGIS, ArcGIS Administrator, open that up, and it'll give you, the computer's name, and then originally this should look this way. Go ahead and expand your desktop, and you'll see the borrow return, and you'll notice to borrow return licenses, check or uncheck the boxes next to the features and click apply. You can only do a maximum of 30 days.
So you want to go ahead and select 3D Analyst, borrow that, and also the Spatial Analyst. Go ahead and borrow that and go ahead and click OK.
And that's the first step that you want to do before opening up ArcMap. The next step, you want to go into your C drive and make sure you have a Scratch folder and or a Workspace folder. And we'll go over this in ArcMap, making sure your workspace is set up correctly. So when you first open ArcMap, you'll see two items below the Geoprocessing tab, Environments Workspace. You want to make sure you set that to either Scratch or Workspace, depending on what folder you created. The tool will not work if you're set up on C Scratch and you're trying to put things in C Workspace, or vice versa. So they have to correlate with each other. And also the second step under the environmental settings, you want to set the parallel processing and make sure that is set to 100%. And then the next step, you want to make sure your extensions are selected that we borrowed. So if you go into the Customize tab up top, under Extensions,
make sure 3D Analyst and Spatial Analyst are selected, and then go ahead and click Close.
Next step, we're going to go over the NRCS toolbox. NRCS toolbox was created to utilize LiDAR, create topo, create watersheds, for NRCS folks. So this is how we're going to actually create our DEM file and clip that so it's not the entire county. So it's just a clipping tool within ArcMap basically, but it's simplified for everyone to use. So in order to use that, you must load it first. And you'll notice on the top of your screen, there's a little toolbox icon. You can click on that to select your new toolbox, add a toolbox. Or you can right click once your toolbox bar is open, you can right click that and add toolbox. You want to navigate to the FGO data folder. You'll notice there's an NRCS tools box file that you will actually open. So go ahead and click open. Once you click open, it'll close this and you'll notice that the Arc toolbox, it should load up automatically and you'll see it in the toolbox list. If you don't see that pop up, you didn't load it correctly. In order for that to come in every time you load ArcGIS, ArcMap, you can go to Arc Toolbox, right click, and go to Save Settings and save those settings to default, and then that way it'll constantly open up when you open up ArcMap. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this using ArcMap. So once you open up ArcMap, in this case I just have a map zoomed in a little bit, but you'll notice with ArcMap, you have the table of contents on this side, you have some buttons up top here, some toolbars, and then on the right-hand side, I just have my catalog open, which, when you go to Windows, you can turn your catalog on and off. You can turn your table of contents on and off, and then there's a search tab. That's really the three that I use. But in this case, we want to make sure if you go under Geoprocessing tab and under Environments, under Workspace, you want to make sure that this is set correctly to either see Scratch or see Workspace, and both of them are set the same. And then also you want to go down to your parallel processing and make sure that's set to 100%. The other step you want to do, since you borrowed those licenses, you need to go to Customize and go into your extensions, and then make sure that the two are selected, and go ahead and hit Close. One thing you also want to do, if you're not familiar with the ArcMap, ArcGIS, you need to make a folder connection for your FGO data. So how you do that, you can right click and connect to a folder, and then you can navigate to the FGO data folder. But if you've already have, some of your layers on your, if you have a template made up in ArcMap, which, hopefully people do, that's basically how you set this up, set it up with a template, and most of this information comes from the FGO data, so you should have that connection made. But if not, that's how you do it. You have to go into your folder connection and add that connection. So to add our toolbox, here's your Arc Toolbox to show that, and then you'll right click, add toolbox, and then we want to navigate to the FGO data tab or folder. And on this one, it's that FGO data. And if you go all the way to the right, you'll see the NRCS toolbox file. Go ahead and click Open. And you'll notice it'll load on the right-hand side here. So now we have the NRCS Tools toolbox. And if you expand that, there's some different tools within that toolbox we'll go over. And then again, you want to make sure if you right click on the toolbox to save the settings, and you want to make sure you save them to default. So now when you close ArcMap, open it back up, the NRCS toolbox should come up automatically as default. The DEM file, digital elevation model file, you want to go to the FGO data elevation, go ahead and click Add, LiDAR all counties, click Add, and then select the county that you want to add to that ArcMap. Once you add the DM data correctly, it'll be shown in the table of contents here, and it will be selected, it'll be checked, and it'll load up that entire layer in the ArcMap. I would suggest to make the program run faster and it doesn't bog down, to go ahead and uncheck that. That way when we're selecting our AOI, we're not bogging the system down. As long as you have some type of reference that you can create your AOI from, area of interest, you don't really need to have that DM file clicked on. So adding the AOI under the NRCS Tools button, you want to make sure before, actually selecting your AOI, you want to be zoomed into an area where you're going to select that AOI. And just keep in mind, the larger that AOI is, the larger the file data is, the more points are going to be brought into Civil 3D, the larger the file size. So in some cases, you want to try to minimize the amount of data that you're extracting from GIS and bring it into Civil 3D because the file size do get pretty big with LiDAR. So just keep that in mind when you're creating your AOI. So under your NRCS Tools tab, go ahead and expand that. And you'll see 3 different folders, HEL, Import, Export Data, and LiDAR Tools. Go ahead and expand the LiDAR Tools. And then we're going to go ahead and select the Get LiDAR AOI and Contour line. So a splash window will come up, and we'll go over each individual areas that we have to input data into. So number 1, the input county LiDAR layer. That's pretty straightforward. We're just going to select the DEM file that we inserted into our drawing. So if we do not have that inserted into our drawing, we hit the drop down, it will not show any type of DEM in there. So you have to make sure that that DEM file has been inserted into the drawing in order to have that to create your AOI from. Go ahead and select your contour interval in feet. This really doesn't matter unless you're showing contours in ArcMap. We can adjust the contour intervals when we bring the data into Civil 3D. So if you don't want the contour intervals shown at 1 foot, or if you want to change it to 2 foot, it's strictly for ArcMap only. So you can select 1, 2, whatever you want, but it's only going to be shown in ArcMap if you were to create contours in ArcMap. Area of interest. This is where we're going to select what we're going to export that data. So we're going to export the LiDAR from this AOI, area of interest. Again, keep in mind, the larger the AOI, the larger the file size, and this may cause your Civil 3D to run slow. Keep that area as close to what you need or require as possible. Number 4, set the contour line's output location. Again, here we are, see scratch. And then the training, I just called it training, and it's a shapefile. So this is where your contour line shapefile will be saved. If you set up workspace correctly, it should default to your workspace setting. In this case, C scratch. If you looked in our environments originally, it was set to C scratch. You can name this to whatever you want. If there is a red X next to it, the file location is incorrect or the file already exists. And keep in mind too that it has a maximum amount of text string associated with it. So if you said training 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you might get an X over here, and you'll just have to take out some of those numbers because the text string is too long. I think it's limited to 12 for the text string, but I'm not 100% positive on that. But if you do get an X, it's giving you a warning, and you just want to change that. So number 5 is your output AOI. This is the location where you're going to set the default workspace setting again to C scratch, and then again you can name it whatever you want. If there is a red X, it's either going to say that that file already exists or the string is too long. So once you put all this information in, as soon as you come off of that splash window, there'll be like a crosshair. That's saying that you need to create your AOI. So in this case, once I came off of this splash window, I created my AOI of what I actually needed. Once all your information looks correct, go ahead and click OK. Once you click OK, a splash window will appear while the file is being created. If there is a problem creating the file, there will be a warning in the box and the file won't be created. And it will tell you the actual error that has occurred. It might say C workspace or C scratch is not an actual folder. So you'll know that you'll have to set up your workspace settings or create that file folder. If there's no problems, the AOI with the contours will be created as it's shown below. So you'll notice the training AOI is what I named in the C scratch, and it's showing the DEM file in that AOI area, and then also the training contours that I named back here for the shape file for the contour lines is created. So that's the two outputs that you'll get once you get the LiDAR AOI and contour line splash window. So now I'll go ahead and walk you through this in ArcMap. All right, so now that we have ArcMap open, again, we have our NRCS tools. We want to expand that. And we go to our LiDAR tools, get LiDAR AOI and contour lines, double click, and a splash window will appear. So you'll see a couple errors already on here. First off, you want to select your Cecil or your whatever your LiDAR is on here. You'll select it. So you'll notice that I do have Maryland in the LiDAR layer. So I can select that, and then that X goes away. So if I didn't have one in there, it wouldn't show. Contour intervals, I always like to change that to 1, but like I said, you can adjust that in Civil 3D once we bring the data in. Again, area of interest, if I slide out here, you'll see the crosshairs jump out. So we can go ahead and create our area of interest now. And if you need to go beyond of where you're at, you can click your mouse wheel and hold it down to move your map, and then let go. That's basically the pan button if you needed to move it over. And you'll notice in this case, it's creating that AOI. When you're completed that task, go ahead and double click. And you'll notice that it'll highlight it, saying that that's the AOI that we've created. Go back into your splash window, so that's been created. Set contour lines output location. You'll notice here there's an X. And if you hover over that X, actually, it'll explain to you what the error is. And it says in this one, the contour lines underscore FT shapefile already exists. So we have to name it something else. So contour training. And you'll notice that X goes away. And output AOI, we can say training AOI. And if we select off of that, you'll notice again, it's saying training AOI already exists. So we'll say AOI 1. Select off of that, now that X goes away. Before you go ahead and click OK, it's a good practice to check your environments again to make sure that you're working in the C-Scratch workspace. And again, just double checking your parallel processing, making sure that it's at 100%. Just a good rule of thumb to make sure that, you know, the actual tool will run properly. Go ahead and click OK. And it'll run this tool. And it usually happens fairly quick. And you'll get an error message fairly quick also if it doesn't work. Or if it does work, it does happen quick though. So let the tool run. And it's saying, you know, what it's doing, it's executing, you know, the process and where it's going, gives you a start time, stop time, and if it was successful or not. So in this case, it was successful, and it took this amount of time, 13.66 seconds to do that. Go ahead and click close. And now you'll notice that we have both the AOI for a training AOI that we created, also the contour training contours that we've had. So that's the only information that we need from ArcMap. So we've created that, you know, file, if you will, in order to, you know, import that into Civil 3D. Now there is another step that I'm going to show you There's a couple different ways of importing it into Civil 3D and different file types. I'm going to show you a quicker way than what we've done in the past, but I'll walk you through the directions first and show you. So there's a couple different ways of exporting this file, and we'll go through those directions now. So now we're going to export our AOI. Now that your AOI is be completed, we're ready to export that and import it into Civil 3D. There's different directions out there in the past that, once you create that AOI, you take that folder and, you dump it into your S drive or your working folder, and you pull the ADF file and import it that way. You can still do it that way. I'm just going to go over a different way of doing this. It seems a little bit more streamlined and quicker for folks, and it's just a TIFF file. So that's what I'm going to go on this training. So if you right click on your AOI, go to Data, Export Data. The following window will appear. Keep everything what it looks is displayed here. It's basically a default. The two things you want to change down at the bottom is the location. So you want to change it to C Scratch file location and then the name of it and the format. So you want to change it to a TIFF file and then, name it to whatever you want. If it's a landowner's name, you can put that in there, whatever's easiest for you to remember. Go ahead and click Save. And then the following window will appear. Would you like to add the exported data to the map as a layer? You can do that if you want to. And all it is just a layer that's, in your map that you can, add later to another map that you want to open up. But that's up to you. I always select no. Now you're ready to import the file into your Civil 3D design. You can copy that TIFF file that you created in the C Scratch folder and place it into the working folder of the project that you're importing the file into. This is very important to do because when you import that file into your drawing, you will make sure that all users have access to that file location. They will not be able to see the surface. So just keep that in mind. So when you're updating your surface or you're uploading into SharePoint, you have to make sure that that file goes along with your drawing because it's referencing the data to that specific file. So if your file is in your C Scratch and someone opens up the folder in the S drive or in the SharePoint and you didn't add that data in there, it's going to give an error if they were to, try to adjust that or redraw that surface. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to walk you through these steps on ArcMap now. So now that we have our AOI created, you can see it here. I'm just going to minimize this window just so we can see the full window here. So now that we have our AOI, our contours, we're going to export this. You right click, Data, Export Data, and you'll come up with a splash window showing export raster data. Keep all this the same. And then if you want to go down to the bottom, make sure the location is set to your C Scratch. And then change the name to whatever you want. And the format, you want to make sure that it's a TIFF file. So we can call this training AOI 2. And it's going to go into C Scratch. Go ahead and click Save. Now, my recommendation is just put it in your C Scratch and then you can cut it and paste it into your working folder. So we'll go ahead and click Save. Again, would you like to add the exported data to the map as a layer? You can click yes or you can click no. I always select no. And usually it happens instantly, exporting that. So if we go into our C Scratch folder, and we go into our Scratch, you'll notice that a TIFF file was made here, AOI2. We double click that. That's our AOI. Doesn't look like much, but it does have information embedded in it. So now we can copy this and put it in our working folder and we can pull it from. So once you're done exporting that, we're done with ArcMap, so you can go ahead and close that out. If you want to save this file, you can, but it's not necessary because once you exported that data, technically you don't need the map. So you can just close it out and don't have to save it. So now that we have exported our TIFF file, now we can go ahead and import that TIFF file into Civil 3D. There's a couple ways of doing this. I'm going to go through this way in the PowerPoint presentation. Make sure that you have a template open, because if you don't have a template open, this process will not work unless you select the correct projection. So our templates are already set up in the correct projection with a Maryland state plane. If you open up just the out-of-box template, this will not work. So you want to create a surface. So in our templates, we have an existing surface, proposed surface, and an as-built surface. You want to go ahead and right-click on the surface, create surface. The type is going to be a tin surface, and we can go ahead and rename that to LiDAR. If you wanted to change the surface layer, you could, but I would just keep it at default under existing surface layer. But the one thing that you will want to change is just the actual, what the surface name is. And you can change it to LiDAR, you can change it to whatever you want. The style you can select here also, existing contours 1 and 5, or, you know, when we get into Civil 3D, I'll show you how to adjust those in the surface also. Go ahead and click OK. Now that you've created the surface, you have to go into that surface, expand the definition, and then you have to right-click on the DEM file, and you're going to click Add. Go ahead and click the little DEM icon to locate your DEM file. And you'll notice here on the bottom that the current drawing is set up in the Maryland 83F and then NAD 83 state plane UTM projection. So that's another way if you know you bring in a LiDAR and it doesn't show up, it's more or less something to do with your projection within Civil 3D. But if you open up a template, it's going to be already set up for you. So go ahead and navigate where you have that file. You know, this could be in your C Scratch or it could be in the working folder if you already cut and pasted it. But like I said, make sure that whatever folder it's in your drawing, it's going to reference to that drawing. So once I open it, you'll see that DM file name. It's under my C username, and this is the location. For everybody else, if you're doing a drawing and it's something that has to be reviewed or other people need to see it, this should be under your S drive under working folder. So just keep that in mind. Once you bring that in, this kind of gives you a description of it, of the actual file itself. Gives you estimated point total within that AOI and the coordinate system type. In this case, it's the state plane. Go ahead and click OK. Again, once the DEM has been added, you'll see that it's located here. You can select on it. It's got a little button check. And then down here, if you right-click on this, it again will give you the properties of where it's actually located, and again, all the properties that we just saw on the previous page. So if you're having problems, if you open up a drawing and you cannot see the surface, or the surface has an exclamation point next to it and you try to update it and it's not updating, come into your DEM file, right-click, and see where this actually is located. And if it's in a, you know, somebody else's folder on their desktop or in their Scratch folder, you're going to have to request them to take that folder, that file, and put it in the file that you're able to open up to view. So once you have that DEM file loaded, you can right-click on that surface that we just created, LiDAR, and go ahead and click Zoom to. And once you select Zoom to, it should show you exactly where that area is with the LiDAR shown, and your surface has been created. And I'll walk you through the steps in Civil 3D of doing this. So we have Civil 3D open now. We're in a template. And we're going to go ahead and create our surface. So go ahead and expand your surface. Make sure you're in the Prospector tab. Go ahead and right-click Surface, Create Surface. Make sure it's a tin surface, existing surface, and then you're going to just create the name. In this case, we'll call it LiDAR. You can give it a description if you want. You can change the existing contours to whatever you want, but we can also change that once we create it. But you can do the default existing 1 and 5 for now. If you're in the Eastern Shore, you might have to adjust that to 0.2 and 0.5. Go ahead and click OK. Now we've created this surface. This doesn't have any data in it, so we have to expand that and expand the definition in the DEM files. We can right-click Add, and then we're going to ahead and hit the DEM file location. So in this case, I created it in the C drive under my Scratch. And Training AOI 2, click Open. Again, this is the DEM file name. Estimated point total, I'm in state plane, and the current drawing is in state plane. Click OK, and it does give you some more information here. XY units and feet, and that's based off of this TIFF file. And that just gives you, the state plane US feet, NAT 83. Go ahead, click OK. You'll notice it's adding the points. And again, if you right-click on this, you can go to Properties. This is where it's located. So if I were to put this up on SharePoint, once I created this DEM file from the LiDAR, and somebody wanted to create an alignment from that, they would not be able to do so because that would not be available for them to do because of the file is on my C drive somewhere else. So you want to make sure that this is put in your working folder. So right now it's done, it's completed. We can right click on our surface and we can select zoom to, and you'll notice it zooms exactly to that location where I had my original AOI set up. And you'll also notice that when I hover over, it gives me my existing LiDAR and an elevation. So as I go down through here, it's actually a surface with actual elevations associated with it. Again, with LiDAR, if you right-click Surface Properties, you can change the contours to whatever you want. Click Apply, and you'll notice, you can change whatever you want to on those, adjusting, your LiDAR, just like you would with any other surface. So that's why I was explaining with ArcMap, it doesn't really matter if you have contours as 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can adjust that in the actual Civil 3D properties. So that's your surface. Everything's been created. The other thing is, when you create that LiDAR, file, so we did the TIFF file, I'm going to show you real quick. If we do another surface, we can create a surface, and we'll just call this, let's say, LiDAR ADF. Again, we go through the definition, the DEM files, we're going to add that. Go to our C drive, and in this case, you're actually going to have to go into there's a folder that's made up in your Scratch of your AOI, and then you got to make sure down here in the file types, and that's another thing with the TIFF file, you got to make sure that that's selected to TIFF. It might default to the ADF file, so if you're trying to add a file and you don't see, TIFF in here in your C scratch, make sure that this is set up to a TIFF file, and now you see your TIFF file showing. Same way with the ADF. So in this case, here's our ADF file. Again, I've always said that, look at the largest size, but you can pick the HDR ADF file, or you can pick the one with the larger size. Both of them work. Go ahead and click OK. Again, gives you the points, the UTM, pretty much the same stuff. Click OK. It's adding it. And if we go no display on this one, fly. So now this is the ADF file. And again, it's showing the LiDAR surface and the ADF file surface, so they're exactly the same thing. So that's just two different ways of bringing in LiDAR. Is one better than the other? Not that I'm aware of. It's just two different ways of doing it. So you can do it using the ADF file that was created when you create your DEM, or you can export the data as a TIFF file and bring it in that way. The only reason I like the TIFF file because it's a one file that you can just drag and drop into your working folder and it's done. You don't have to, take that entire folder when you add that ADF file, because that ADF file has to have all those associated files with it. So it's that entire folder you have to bring in to your working folder, which isn't a big deal. We've done that in the past. But that's the two ways that we can do it. So this will conclude this training on inserting LiDAR into Civil 3D.